I think maybe it's time for some questions if there are some around.
For sure, we have some. Somebody asked what mic was on the cab. I can't see it from here.
It's a AKG 451,
It's a 451
or 460 or 452. They're all basically essentially the same thing. If you don't get mad at me, microphone nerds.
And how far do you put that from the grill? And is it different on a bass cab?
Yeah, it's a little different
cab?
because low end
travels
differently,
yeah.
And you don't necessarily want to have it as close mic'd because it needs time to develop and build, and so you'll want to find a good spot for it by listening to it, much like the guitar mics. But whereas those you're usually moving them sideways along the grill.
Okay.
These in the bass world you're kind of moving them front and back, and even in the bass world as well. Very often we put a lot of dampening around it to keep extraneous noise out of it.
Okay.
Like the packing blanket is still hanging out, and spilled a little mini ISO booth.
What's as far as you would ever put a mic away from a bass cab? I mean, to get a close miking sound.
In the metal world,
like
I would stay pretty close.
Okay.
But if you're looking for some kind of like really wild and crazy sound that's kind of washy and it's really open. There's only one guitar there, and it's kind of like, I don't know, Lenny Kravitz kind of rock or something. You could really like have it come out a little bit, have the bass be wilder and crazier sounding because you're picking up more of the room that's around. And that's a taste thing. All the metal stuff, bass is almost, I don't want to call it an afterthought because some people do very, very exciting things with it, but there's not a lot of room for it, so you have to be very deliberate in the sound so you can really make out what's going on with it.
Okay.
Yeah, bass doesn't get as much of a time to shine in a lot of heavy metal stuff.
Maybe a breakdown or something.
Maybe, yeah, but most of the time, and this is an interesting arranging thing that I think Gene was telling me about in the early days of Death Clock, because I like the idea when you can put a counter melody in, or you can do something, or you can go up an octave. You can hear that when we do that in Death Clock. But there's another thing that happens when you have like hauling double kicks. You don't need to play that much to support that in a bass. And this is an arranging trick where you can play whole notes underneath that, and something happens where it sounds like it's a bass player going like this, like going crazy. You can just play whole notes and travel and kind of declutter that area too by just having that tone. If your bass is compressed, if it's set up nice enough, you can have those sounds just kind of like these big fat whole notes just sit there underneath. That's a heavy metal arranging thing, and I think he would do that stuff in Strapping Young Lad and all that stuff too with Byron. And then every once in a while you can find a little pocket where a bass can really do something cool and add to the harmony and move the song along as a bass is supposed to in music, Sure, yeah. So it's always a struggle to find the right pocket for bass. Now I notice my preference when we're doing the mixing, and we're going to hear this later on tomorrow when we get into the mixing of Blazing Star and the Galacticon stuff, is I like that nice warm low end just happening and not too much of the clank unless we're going crazier on like a fast part and it's aggressive. But I like that warm, almost like Foo Fighters style kind of like fatness underneath it. Yeah. Which I don't always hear. I always hear, we listen to old metal from the early 80s or the early 90s and 80s, and we hear kind of we hear a scooped out thing with just a clangy top end. Yeah. And we know that sound.
That or not hear the bass at all.
Or not hear the bass at all.
Especially on just vinyl releases where when people started tuned down and started playing fast kick drums and it's still going out on vinyl.
Yeah.
People didn't really know how to treat that right,
Well, in the 90s, when you scooped all the mids out of the guitars and you had those high poppy double kicks, the bass is just like, where do I go? I don't have any place to go now. So putting a little bit more of the mids back in the guitars gives the bass a little bit more of a place to be warm and low. So that's a personal preference, and again, we'll have more examples of that in the future. But when playing bass, when tracking bass, it's not going to be as involved as the dual guitars, as the rhythm guitars. But there are a lot of moments where you can really add to your song. And it's and it's like I was saying earlier, it's harmonic choices. It's having chord knowledge and knowing that you have more than one option. You don't just have to play the root and the fifth.
And you're gluing the drums to the guitars with the bass.
Yes.
Like the bass is very much the glue
Right.
for the whole thing, for the whole rhythm section.
Yes.
Like a well-played bass is a beautiful thing.
It really is. And there are times where I've done it, but not often. I really have to sit there and become a bass player and really have to think like one. But the truth is that I still think that all bass players or people who are going to track bass should really think melodically and harmonically. You really can travel through a group of chords. You can almost think like a walking bass player and move the bass along in a nice way. I think even the first song that Gene and myself and Ulrich did was a song off of Death Album 1, and this is a song that we had to get done in one day because I was giving it to like the Saw 3 soundtrack in Europe or something like that, said that they would put a song of mine on there, and I said, okay. So this is a song called Hatred Copter off the first album, but the song was written probably the day before, very quickly, and it was recorded and tracked the rest of in one day. And I remember there was a moment where you suggested, and I was playing bass, and there was the chorus happens, then we modulate up, I think, a full step,
sure.
and then I think there's a walking bass line that da 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 do do da da do do da da do da da do da da do 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 do. Instead of going bam 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 bam, there are ways to like think like Paul McCartney would. Again, like anytime you can put like I was saying earlier, like a melody that just goes up the actual diatonic scale is sometimes a really satisfying thing. Finding ways to walk a bass line in heavy metal is sometimes surprising and melodic, and we may not expect it, but it makes your song more interesting in a lot of ways. And then again, like I said earlier, is you don't always have to play the root. Sometimes if the guitar player's got the root, you can put the third in the bass. You can put the fifth in the bass, or you can travel third, fourth to the fifth. As long as your extra notes are on the weak beats, you can do all that stuff. But know your chords, know your options of notes. It's an experiment as much as you can, because especially in Pro Tools, you've got a million tries to do something, so you may as well take advantage of all that stuff. But know the three notes of every chord. It sounds really simple, but it will make your song sound different, or it'll make it sound like my music. I don't know, one of the two. So that's just an arranging thing. Again, playing the whole notes instead of the clanking along, because you may cause a little bit more traffic inside of your thing by having more clangy kind of like sounds or whatever picking sounds when you're trying to match with double
that
kicks.
can be your thing too, you know.
Yeah.
I mean that really works for Fieldy from Korn. That's half of his bass sound is clank. The rest of it is just like 20 hertz humming along. You know what I mean? It's
Right,
so
yeah,
low,
clank
it's
and
hard
then
to
here.
discern an actual note anymore, but with some of those tunings. But that's his signature thing. So if you were to go in and try to take that away from him, then you're like, what happened to Korn? What happened?
Yeah.
You know? And
They will not sound the same, right?
yeah, and so, you know, like you that's the whole thing about finding your identity as an artist and as a musician, and you know what is it that you do? What makes you unique? Well, why should I buy your record?
Right.
You know what I mean? It's like,
right. Yeah. So those are some of the things I think. Another thing I like to do, because pretty much at this point in the recording, we have nailed down the drums and the guitars, and we may even have a couple guitar harmonies, and we know where the big fills are, we know where all the stuff is, we know the important musical beats. We don't necessarily know what the vocals are, and I don't know them at this point in the song at all. I'll only figure those out at the very end. Normally, it's very rare that I come in with a vocal line first or a melody.
but you'll have bits and pieces
From the TV show, yeah. But like, let's say like on a song that I don't know,
Sure.
let's say
Like
for
this
example, this song, I don't know what this is. This could be something from a future solo album or something. I don't know how this is going to turn out. I don't think it's going to be a solo guitar song. I'd rather have those all be vocal lines and see how the bass can support that. But some of my favorite bands don't repeat. They repeat notions of sections, but they don't repeat them identically. So if you go back and listen to old Queen, every turnaround is different. Like on the Prophet's song, every time they get to a turnaround, it thrusts us into a new key, or it's a different vibe from the last time. And you can kind of pay tribute to that through the bass. If you don't need the bass to repeat the same way every single time. In fact, if your guitar line is similar for maybe 8 bars, the bass can advance the importance of that through doing the second half an octave higher. So think about things in that way, or like reharmonized. I reharmonize everything in every song. You'll hear tons of reharm in
Blazing Star.
in Blazing Star. There's a lot of reharm going on there. So consider that stuff when you don't have to just sit there and clang through boring
the roots,
roots. Yeah, you can really.
Although that can be very satisfying too, and okay.
It really can. It can, but you don't have to if you don't want to. You can. It's your decision.
I think it just gave a lot of freedom to a lot of bass players to raise hell in their bands.
Well, they can be musical. That wouldn't hurt. There's nothing wrong with a musical bass player. I think that really actually helps, as opposed to like, hey, you. Hey, put that thing down. You want to play bass? Which sometimes happens in heavy metal.
Sure.
So that's I think what I would leave with is that you really can advance the song. You don't need to be out in the open to really push a song into a cool direction that it needs to be pushed in. And you don't have to play the same thing the whole time. You can advance and change, and you can just make the song feel different through the lower frequencies. So there you go. And like I said earlier, if you want to go back, for those of you who joined late, check out section 1, because I give you an example of not playing the root. Or if the guitar's playing an inversion chord, like I talked about earlier, you can play the root. So we do know. But it's all over Death Clock. It's all over Galacticon. It's all over the Doomstar stuff.
Yep.
Yeah. So that style of bass playing. And if you don't have a guitar teacher or a bass teacher, and you haven't learned basic chord harmony, it will make your music better, I think. I think you're going to use your ears anyway and hear the things that you want to hear. But this puts a label to the things that you're already hearing and categorizes them quicker. So you can write faster, and you have a bag of tricks. And that's what I think about when the way that Ulrich and I work together is he's got a bag of tricks and I've got a bag of tricks. And then now we have each other's bag of tricks. So if he goes to a different song, he goes, here's a thing I didn't know I could do before, but now I can. And now knowing like what you do with the guitars and the bass and how you record, I'll use all that stuff. But in guitar theory, in chord theory, and in modal theory, and in scalular theory, you're gonna get to a conclusion sooner, and you're gonna have more options. And to be a good writer, joke writer, script writer, or music writer, all you're doing is making decisions, and you're making decisions of the options that are inside of your brain. So if you have more options, then you have more interesting things to choose from. So you're just going to choose a different option, and your ear will tell you the things that you already know. So there are tons of musicians with no musical theory that have spent their lives categorizing in a different way and putting a different label to something else. It's the exact same thing. You just may get there quicker. So learn your chords, learn your inversions of your chords, and it all goes back to classical theory, traditional harmony, where the bass is not always playing the root. The bass is playing sometimes a more interesting note, and to me that note ends up being the third oftentimes. And I can hear that in Queen, I can hear it in Weezer, I can hear it in tons of Yngwie Malmsteen. You can hear that traditional harmony that happens. That sounds like almost classical music is happening, and it really is repositioning the bass, either in the guitar or in the actual bass. So get a good teacher and learn this stuff. You can really learn it in a weekend and start applying it soon in your music. So there's that. Does anybody have any questions about bass or arranging?
Yeah, we have a lot of good questions. Norval wants to know, he's got 2 questions. Do you like to pan the bass slightly off-center with the kick or slightly off to one side, like so one or the other, or both of them straight up. He wants to know if you'd ever pan the bass amp to where it would be on stage to give more of a live feel or live sound.
Not generally, no. Not
Okay.
not in Death Clock or any kind of severe metal.
It's just both of them are straight up.
Yeah,
Okay.
I would even like Van Halen probably at the kick in the center and just the bass off to the side.
Okay.
I know some people have experiment with the actual location of where instruments are on stage, but really at this point in metal production, we're not actually looking at that anymore because we're actually you don't necessarily have the doubled rhythm guitars, especially not during a solo section. And so we're looking at a different bag of tricks for the album and for the recording versus live. Because live, you have a light show, you have smoke, you have like dancers.
You have cartoons.
You have cartoons.
Yeah, which is what we have.
Well, they're the dancers.
They are the dancers,
Yeah,
yes.
and you have the audience. You know what I mean? And that's a huge thing. Like there's an entirely different energy. A section, a musical section that may like go over well live, like an enormously long intro that is very welcome for a singer who screams at the top of his lungs for an entire song, is nice. It's nice for him to have to break, but still fill like dead air space, basically. Versus in the studio where a long intro repeating and building for like 8, 16, 32 bars is extremely boring at that point. So it's like you have an entirely different set of guidelines. Ideally, you have music that works like well recorded and live, but very often I find bands do elongate a section for a live show, or like for a call and answer for the audience thing, or like things like that. So you're not playing by the same rules for live.
Yeah,
and
my
recording.
philosophy is this: that they're two complete. You experience them completely differently. Live is totally different than recording. Recording is that's forever, and that's going to be your main source of listening. For your favorite records that exist. And one doesn't have to really behave the same way as the other. I think of, again, Queen. They're an amazing 4-piece live on the record. They're a 100-piece band, but they capture the energy because they're such good players and they have just great connection on stage. So I think it's whatever you want it to be. If you find something that works for you. I never thought to pan the bass off to the side, and I thought the symmetry of the double kicks, they're still down the center because that's where they need to be, and they're holding down the fort, and I think about that too. And they are in the center of the drum kit too, but the bass I think has got to be kind of right there with those double kicks, locking in as much as they can.
Unless it's a Van Halen record, and then that's...
Yeah, I didn't even realize they did that. Did they do that?
Yeah,
They panned the bass off?
Mm-hmm.
I guess they're trying to find some symmetry between Eddie being on this side or his reverb, whichever way they do it, because I know they put reverb on one side and the guitar on the other, and then I guess the bass is over there, and David Lee Roth wherever he wants to be.
Yeah.
But those are all crazy philosophies that I guess they make sense, and I didn't even notice. And I listened to Van Halen on vinyl and stuff too, and I didn't even know that the bass was panned because you can't hear it on those records.
Well, he's doing the quarter note thing.
No, but it sounds great, whatever it is. So, any other questions?
Yeah, Norval has another one. Do you ever EQ frequencies out of the bass to make way for the kick drum, or vice versa? He said 50 hertz, 80 hertz, or 5K.
Absolutely.
Okay.
And we will be getting more into that during mixing.
Okay.
It all has to work together. It's the low end of the bass and the low end of the kick and the low end of the guitars have to push and hit you and and make sense together. The same way as the middle of the guitars and the vocals and the snare have to coexist together, and the high end as well. And
Short answer is yes.
Yeah, the short answer is yes.
Are we going to get into that tomorrow?
We'll get into that tomorrow.
Okay.
Carving out space and making space for an orchestra and a live band that both deserve equal attention in the audio spectrum.
Yeah, I'm glad I didn't have to do that.
Thanks.
Now you get to put it on your resume.
There you go. It's already on there.
I've also noticed, and this is the DI way and the live amp way. Sometimes, I think oftentimes I've given you a DI and said,
Make it happen.
make it work.
Sure, yeah.
Because I just know how to do it and I just don't want to get into. I've got all my mics set up in the place where I like them.
Absolutely.
And that will give you a different response, that mic'd amp. And I've heard other people say sometimes, put a bass through a guitar amp. What you want to hear is there's an attack that happens that's differently on that than it happens DI. DI can sound a little square and a little just kind of clean and too pure, you know?
Yeah.
But you want a little bit of weird mid-rangey dirt on it.
Yeah,
and
absolutely.
sometimes the amp will do that, but I've heard that too.
Absolutely, and reamping a bass is easier on my system than it is reamping guitars, because when you actually play an amp, it responds to your playing, but not only that, you're responding to the amp's response to your playing.
Right.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
It's like you're making the amp sound a certain way, like you're using your hands to like make the whole thing its thing. So when you record a DI along with that amp sound and then reamp it with some other amp, it's not gonna do the same thing with that amp. It might still be cool, don't get me wrong, but it's not gonna do the same thing. Like the response of the amp to your hand is not the same. And so I'm not generally a big fan of reamping guitars, although sometimes that can be a lot of fun, you know?
It would probably kill 2 days for me reamping, but that's why I don't do it.